Some of the earliest and most important advances in mankind's march towards civilization were made in the Near Eastern lands, which are known today as Israel, Iran, and Iraq. These territories are located at one of the world's important crossroads. Located in the continent of Asia, they also touch Africa, Asia Minor, and the Mediterranean Sea, the gateway to Europe. The cultures which were established in this territory were open to influences from many other lands and could themselves act as a civilizing force on neighboring cultures. Today, we shall focus upon 4 civilizations which flourished in this area thousands of years ago. The Babylonian civilization, the Hebrew nation, the Phoenicians, and the Persian Empire. All of these made many important contributions to mankind, and we will try to point these out during our discussion. Let us travel to the territory of the Middle East, where the story of these civilizations begins. In Southwest Asia, along the fertile valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, there were many early civilizations. The land bound by these 2 rivers was ideally suited for crop raising, and permanent settlements began to be established in this region as early as 4000 BC. By 3000 BC, complex culture had arisen with the beginnings of a civilization. The territory was divided into 2 kingdoms, the Sumerian to the southeast and the Akkadian to the northwest. The 2 kingdoms consisted of numerous semi-independent city-states, and these formed stable political units. In the Euphrates Valley, the Babylonians built their chief city, Babylon. Babylon began as a minor town in the kingdom of Akkadia. As time passed, it grew in size and importance. When the conquering Amorites invaded Akkadia in 1850 BC, they chose it as their capital. Thereafter, Babylon became the political and cultural center for the whole area. A new era of prosperity and power began. Babylon grew in size and population, and magnificent temples and public buildings were constructed there. Much of the building was of colored brick. They had little stone in the valley. Clay, however, was abundant, and the Babylonians were quite efficient in forming it into bricks, which could be used for construction. In one sense, it is unfortunate that the Babylonians relied so heavily upon bricks as building material, for very little of their architectural work has survived to our own day. We must use our imagination to call up a mental picture of how Babylon appeared in the days of its glory, with the help of the ruins which have remained to us and descriptions which were made of the city when it was at its height. On the other hand, Babylon's dependence upon clay had at least one fortunate result. The Babylonians wrote by making wedge-shaped characters in soft clay. The clay tablet was then dried in the sun. Such tablets were a great deal more durable than paper, and for this reason our knowledge of ancient Babylonian culture is extensive. Scholars have learned to translate the Babylonian script, which is called cuneiform. Thousands and thousands of clay tablets have survived intact and give us much information about the daily life, business affairs, customs, religion, and education in ancient Babylon. We have learned, for example, that while Babylon's economy was largely based on agriculture, there was a large class of artisans and craftsmen who worked in the city. They made beautiful pottery, wove rugs, and made bronze tools. Some of these artifacts have been discovered in archaeological excavations and are on display in some of our large museums. Babylon produced a surplus of manufactured products. The exchange of goods with surrounding areas became, therefore, extremely important. The Babylonians were merchants and traders. They had banks to manage their money. They developed systems of weights and measures. Babylon was the economic center for the entire area. Ledgers, receipts, loans, contracts, and other advanced types of business records have been discovered among the ruins of the city. We know that Babylon traded with Egypt, Syria, and India, and that the Babylonian system of weights and measures was gradually adopted by all of the countries in the Near East. It was the Babylonians who divided the day into 24 hours and who divided the month into 4 7-day weeks. They made many important advances in simple arithmetic and mathematics because of their preoccupation with trade, banking, and land measurement. And one of their most important contributions lay in the area of government and law. About 1750 BC, King Hammurabi gathered Babylonian laws into one set. This is the oldest system of laws. Before Hammurabi's code was drawn up, legal procedure was conducted according to custom and precedent, and there was no strict system of written laws to refer to in legal disputes. Hammurabi's code gave a strong, clear-cut foundation upon which stable legal procedures could be built. The rule of Hammurabi ushered in a long period of order and stability, which ended only when Babylon was attacked by foreign invaders. Babylonia was conquered by the Assyrians, who were then conquered by the Chaldeans. The Assyrian ruler, Sargon, swept over Babylonia in 1300 BC and added it to his empire. Assyrian rule lasted nearly 700 years, but came to an end when the Chaldean invaders sacked and destroyed Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. One of the early Chaldean rulers undertook the task of restoring the city of Babylon to its former magnificence. This was Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled from 605 to 562 BC. Nebuchadnezzar, the last great king of Babylon, built the Hanging Gardens. Legend has it that Nebuchadnezzar's wife was born in wild regions far from the city of Babylon. She was unhappy in the city and longed for the beauty of her wild, mountainous homeland. Nebuchadnezzar built the Hanging Gardens in imitation of a mountain, filling them with beautiful trees, flowers, shrubs, and little streams. Here his wife might wander about and imagine that she was in her mountainous homeland. In any case, the ancients listed these magnificent gardens as one of the 7 wonders of the world. Unfortunately, they have been totally destroyed, and we have no real idea of how they looked. Babylon's story comes to an end in 539 BC, when the Persian Emperor Cyrus the Great captured it and made it a part of his empire. We shall discuss the achievements of the Persians shortly, but first let us consider the contributions of a small and seemingly insignificant nation which grew up in the land of Palestine. To the west, along the Mediterranean Sea, were a nomadic people called Hebrews. As you remember from the Bible, the Hebrew nation considered Abraham as its founder. The Hebrews spent a long period of captivity in Egypt until they were led out by their great lawgiver Moses to settle in the land of Israel. The Hebrews had originally depended mainly upon their herds for a livelihood, but they began to raise crops and settle in cities. They established a priesthood and a monarchy. The first king was Saul, who was replaced by King David, the father of Solomon. The Hebrew nation reached its greatest height under King Solomon. He built the great temple at Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the political and spiritual center for the whole kingdom. After Solomon's rule, however, the kingdom went into a period of decline, during which Israel was subject to the successive invasions of the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Romans. Throughout all of these periods of hardship and suffering, the Hebrew nation had one great comfort: their religion. The Hebrews were noted for their belief in only one God. They considered the worship of wood and stone idols, superstitious and profane. They were forbidden to represent their god by any carved image. All of the sacred writings and laws of the Hebrews were carefully recorded in Hebrew script, written on long scrolls, which were preserved and copied for centuries. These writings go to make up the Old Testament of the Bible. Judaism is not the only religion which traces its beginning back to the land of Palestine, for Jesus Christ was born in the land of the Hebrews. From his teachings, Christianity grew. Jesus appeared during the Roman occupation of Palestine and traveled throughout the land preaching repentance, love of fellow man, and obedience to God's will. The story of his life and preaching, as well as the missionary work done by his apostles, is recorded in the New Testament of the Bible. Here you see one incident from that story: Jesus' birth in a stable of the town of Bethlehem. Let us now consider the achievements of another people who lived in the same area, the Phoenicians. To the north of the Hebrews lay the land of the Phoenicians. Phoenicia grew up along the shores of the Mediterranean in the area which is called Syria today. The land along the seacoast was not extremely fertile, and the mountains to the east separated the Phoenicians from the fertile region around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Because of the mountains, the Phoenicians turned to the sea for a living. They built large boats equipped with sails and oars. They learned efficient ways of constructing boats and made many important advances in the science of navigation. At first, boats were built mainly for fishing purposes, but as time passed, they began to be used almost entirely for trade. The Phoenicians were the world's first great traders. They sailed their boats along the Mediterranean coasts. The arrows on the map indicate the major Phoenician trade routes. They set out from their two major cities, Tyre and Sidon, and reached such diverse areas as the Black Sea, Greece, Egypt, Italy, France, Northern Africa, Spain, and England. They even sailed past the Pillars of Hercules, which we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. It is at this point that the Mediterranean opens out into the Atlantic Ocean. Before the Phoenicians, sailors did not dare sail out of the Mediterranean because they were afraid to strike out into the uncharted waters of the Atlantic. The Phoenicians, however, who wished to expand their trade, did not hesitate to sail around Spain and up the coast of France to reach England, an unheard-of journey at that time. The Phoenicians developed a number of important business techniques, and in addition developed a simplified form of writing based on an alphabet to use in recording their business transactions. From the alphabet used by the Phoenician traders, our own alphabet developed. Compare the two as you see them here. Do you see any similarities between them? The advantages of an alphabet system are obvious. With the aid of a few symbols standing for the sounds in a language, any word of the language can be spelled out. It is not necessary to represent words with pictures or abbreviated combined forms. If the Phoenicians had made no other contributions, they would be remembered for the ingenious linguistic device of the alphabet. Let us now consider the accomplishments of another civilization which flourished in the Middle East thousands of years ago, the Persians. The Persians, living to the east of the Persian Gulf, built up the largest empire the world had known to that time. The kingdom of Persia grew up in the area today known as Iran. As it increased in strength, it began absorbing surrounding territories. Persian generals took over parts of India, Arabia, the old Babylonian Empire, Asia Minor, and even made a few expeditions into Greece. Eventually, however, the Macedonian soldier-statesman Alexander the Great defeated the Persian emperor Darius in the 4th century BC and took over most of the Persian Empire. After his death, however, the Greeks soon lost control over their Asian territories, and Persian culture was left more or less intact. The Persians were among the first people to build good roads. Roads were important because they provided speedy transport of supplies or soldiers throughout the vast Persian Empire. Before the Persians, roads between distant cities consisted of mere trails through rough territory, and travel was, of course, quite slow. The Persians also established a postal system similar to our old Pony Express. In an era without telegraph, telephone, or radio, communication between different parts of the empire was necessarily slow. A relay system of horses who galloped along the Persian highways at top speed helped to solve this problem. It is interesting to note that until the invention of the telegraph in the 19th century, no speedier method of communication had been developed since the days of the Persians. Now, let's pause to see how much you remember from what you have just seen and heard. Here is a list of 5 important contributions given to mankind by ancient civilizations. All but one of them were contributed by the early cultures in Southwest Asia. See if you can spot the item in the list which is not a contribution of the civilizations we have studied today. Here are your choices. 1, the first bank. 2, arithmetic, weights and measures. 3, the idea of one God. 4, the Christian religion. 5, the invention of paper. Did you notice which item did not belong? Let's see if you were right. Contributions of the people of Southwest Asia. 1, the first bank. 2, arithmetic, weights and measures. 3, the idea of one God. 4, the Christian religion. 5, the simplified alphabet. You now see that item number 5 in the first list did not belong. Paper was invented by the Egyptians. The Babylonians used clay tablets instead of paper. But the simplified alphabet was a contribution from the civilizations. It was developed by the Phoenicians, as you remember. The importance of each of these contributions cannot be overestimated. Try to imagine our modern world without any one of them, and the significance of these achievements from ancient Babylonia, Israel, Phoenicia, and Persia will become clear to you.